Okay, we're recording. So again, this is Mark Wasserman, and I'm coming to you from La Quinta. Today, I'm talking with Gail Pope with Brighthaven. And before I ask Gail to speak, I just wanted to give a quick little intro about how I know Gail and why she's here today. I've known Gail for a couple of years. Gail and her husband Richard were actually real estate clients of mine. They actually bought a home in our neighborhood in La Quinta, and I got to talking with Gail and Richard then, and she runs an organization called Brighthaven. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But what made me reach out to Gail about what we're going to talk about today was I see Gail in the neighborhood walking these little dogs, and two of them are blind and deaf. Is that right, Gail?
Yeah, they're both blind, and one of them is blind and deaf.
Blind and deaf. They're these cute little dogs, and Gail just sort of walks around in circles with these dogs, which is really cute, as she speaks so kindly to them. And then there's another one who his back legs or her back legs are broken, or her back was broken, and so the dog cannot use their legs, and they're on a little, she or he's on a little wheelchair, if you will, and he's just walking with his front legs. And Richard usually takes him because he walks really fast, so it's really great to see them every morning. It inspires me every single day, just to be positive and to keep a smile on my face. So Gail, thank you so much for joining me. And one additional thing is that Gail, about a month or two ago, came into Keller Williams and was part of a panel that we did on some nonprofits in our area. And I brought Gail in because I really wanted her to talk about passion, because as real estate agents, we sometimes struggle with the passion for not only the real estate business, but just passion in life. And it's just amazing how passionate you are. So without further ado, that's a quick intro. Gail, if you could tell us a little bit about you and Brighthaven and what you're doing, and then we'll go from there.
Wow, that could take me hours and hours and hours, Mark. Well, a little about me. You can tell from my accent that I probably didn't originate from these parts. I came from England. And actually that my story really begins when I was 40 years old, coming to live in a foreign country. My career in the airline industry was left behind me, and I had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I think, when many of us, male and female, reach the age of 40, we reach that time in life where we kind of go, oh my God, so what's it all about? And so there was I with no clear idea what I was going to do. My husband had been transferred with his job, so he knew what he was going to do. And there was I, unable to work at that time and at home with time on my hands. And it wasn't a happy time. It was a big culture shock coming from England to live in Southern California. And it was around that time it kind of became a family joke. What on earth is Mum going to do when she grows up? And it's a long story, and I won't go into how it developed. But by a series of coincidences, I got onto the 405 freeway one morning on my way to work with my daughter Kirstie. And I was driving up the freeway towards our office in Irvine, and I suddenly said, oh my God, I know what I want to do with the rest of my life. And that was the birth of Brighthaven. Why on earth I decided that I wanted to rescue animals and care for them for the rest of my life, I don't know. When I was a little girl, probably about 5 years old, I wanted to be a veterinarian or an air hostess. And I kind of almost achieved both of them. So sometimes I wonder if we should listen to our 5-year-olds a little more when they say what they want to say.
For sure. When you were talking, I reached over and I grabbed this book called Halftime, which I read. And it's about exactly what you just said. It's about the second half of our lives. And finding, it's by Bob Buford, if you ever get a chance to read it or stop by and I'll give it to you. It's a great book. And it's exactly what you just said. It's about finding that passion in the second half of our lives, which I am in, and that's what this is all about right here. Is I found my passion in teaching and mentoring, but a lot of what we're doing today is really what I'm all about, and that is to try to help others find their passion and really look for their gift. So I appreciate what you just said. So tell us about Brighthaven, because it's fascinating what you do. We were talking a little bit before I hit record, and there's two sides to it. Where is it, and exactly what do you do?
Wow. Again, it could take hours. Brighthaven, the physical place Brighthaven is a sanctuary, and it's in Santa Rosa in Northern California. love to have one down here in Southern California too now. Brighthaven, the physical sanctuary itself, is a place for senior and special needs animals. And when I say senior, I mean, for the most part, cats and dogs over the age of 16 who are suffering from some kind of chronic illness, or they have a recommendation for euthanasia, or they simply are elderly and alone and they don't have a family anymore. We work with a lot of Bay Area shelters, and those are the animals that we take to the sanctuary. Now, we also do other things. We have a networking service, or I guess animal shelter rescue is the title, probably. And I have a wonderful lady called Susan Hoffman who lives in Oakland. She runs our halfway house where we work with shelters and we bring animals out who we feel are adoptable. They're maybe 15, 16, 19, 20. However, we run blood work, we do dentals where we can. Those that are able to be adopted, we adopt out to other people. Now, when we started doing this maybe 6 or 7 years ago, people were saying, are you crazy? No one's going to adopt these old fogies.
Right.
And little by little, as people started to learn, people came to visit the sanctuary and they met some of our old cronies and kind of went, oh my God, he's how old? This is crazy. And so little by little, people started realizing, well, let's face it, we don't care for our human elders as we should, as we really should. In olden days, our human elders were immersed in the family and cared for until their last breath. And we just don't do that anymore, but we can do it with our animals. And, you know, maybe that spreads the love and we'll do it more with our, you know, with our humans too. But there's such a wisdom in the elderly. I've learned more from old animals than I've learned in my entire life.
What have you learned? That's interesting. What have you learned?
Interesting question. I've learned about love. I've learned about living in the moment. I've learned about acceptance and gratitude and non-judgmental way of life. Animals are, I wouldn't say they're necessarily terribly simple. They're like humans. Some are and some aren't. But they have a very simple way of living in the now. They don't look back and they don't look forward. They're not scared of death. They live right here and now. And, you know, that it's easy to say, oh, that's the lesson to learn. But it's probably one of the biggest lessons that any of our spiritual teachers or gurus would love to teach us.
Absolutely.
And that's what animals teach you. And, you know, if you can just be in a space with an animal that you love, that's a very healing place to be. Healing for the animal and healing for you. We call it Reiki in some places, but it's a very profound feeling. And that's what animals teach.
That's great. That's great stuff.
They also teach us when and how to be hungry and things like that.
Yeah. How do you deal? Because you deal with loss, and you also deal with people who have pets, and they bring them to you. Correct?
Actually, not exactly. I certainly deal with the loss of our animals, and I'll come back to that and talk more about it maybe if you'd like to. But
Please.
I do a lot of consultation work these days for people who possibly have received a terminal diagnosis from their veterinarian, and the words animal hospice aren't terribly widely known yet. I was one of the founding board members for an international organization of animal hospice care, and it's gradually growing and growing and growing, and I lecture basically on natural dying and everything surrounding the very end of life at their conferences every year, because I've had so many years of experience that other people don't have. I've learned not to be afraid of death. Bit of a sweeping statement. We all have fears, obviously, but to be able to be with another being through the last stages of their life and not panic and freak out and go racing off down the road in a complete state of shock is something to really learn, and it's very humbling. And it actually is a very, very beautiful experience. But if you don't know what you're getting into, it can be very scary. And, you know, for those of us out there who love our animals with a passion, when you have that passion for another being in life, it's very, very scary to know that they're sick. That maybe they've got cancer, maybe they're just old and there's nothing more to be done, maybe their kidneys are failing. But when modern medicine cannot help, holistic medicine can. And our sanctuary practices holistic healthcare. This is another large side of our work, and half of my consultation practice. It's taking people very often who've had a terminal diagnosis or even just brought a puppy into the house and they're like, well, so what should we do? What do you think we should feed and how would you take care? So a lot of that side of our lives is about diet. We feed a raw meat-based diet to our animals and they flourish on it. We do a lot with immune and organ support. We cross over into conventional healthcare to do sophisticated diagnostics. I think it's very important that we have we know what we're dealing with, and then we take whichever path leads us to the best healing that we can achieve. And sometimes I think one of my biggest lessons was to learn that healing doesn't necessarily mean for continued life. Sometimes healing is to be in the best state of balance to transition into the next life.
Right.
And that's difficult to grasp sometimes, but, it just occurred to me, if you'd have come to me 25, 30 years ago and you'd have said, hey, Gail, let me show you this book about the rest of your life and what you're going to do. And you'd have shown me all these pictures of, if you explore our website, you'll see photos of me with animals at the end of their lives, holding them. I mean, they're beautiful pictures, but if you'd have shown me a set of these pictures, then I would have run screaming because, like everybody else, it just never would have occurred to me when I started rescuing. I mean, it was just cats at the beginning, then it was cats and dogs, then it was horses and chickens, and now we have a real plethora. We have 2 cows, we have 2 pigs, so we have all sorts of animals at the sanctuary, but it's easy to get into rescue, and I think a lot of people develop the passion for it, and after maybe 5 years of doing it, they burn out.
Sure.
And they've done a wonderful job. They've made a huge contribution. I really admire the people who work in rescue, whether it's rescuing humans or animals or whatever. But when you burn out, you burn out. The problem I hadn't realized is that my passion took me to a place where I did burn out. But what was I going to do? I had like 60 cats and 7 dogs living in the house with me. They were all special needs or chronically ill. And I reached a point where I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? So what can I do? I just had to buckle down and get on with it.
Right.
That's probably why my hair's this color. I don't know.
and that's why I love talking to you, because I think that translates into other areas of our lives. I mean, there's so many other people that are passionate about doing something and they do burn out, whether it's a police officer or a fireman or whatever. And I think your stick-to-itiveness and that passion of moving forward is really great. And I thank you for sharing that. I had so many questions that were popping into my head when you were talking. How does what you do translate into your human life?
What human life?
Yeah.
I've actually become a cat over the years, and
That's funny.
Human life doesn't really exist. Actually, well, obviously that's not true. I have a husband. We've actually been married for 50 years.
Wow!
And Richard's still working, partly to help support the work that Brighthaven does. If I wasn't married,
do some of those emotions and some of those, I mean, the things that you've learned about the dying process. And that, have some of those translated into human relationships or
oh, wow.
The question was better in my head than when it came out of my mouth.
Well, if I'm understanding the question properly. Several years ago, my mum had a fall. She was 86. And there was I very well versed in the world of animal hospice care. And yet I didn't make the assumption. It just didn't dawn on me that here was human hospice care until her doctor suggested hospice care. And I'm like, ooh, wow, I don't know about that. I mean, I grew up in a conventional English home where the word hospice was it just wasn't a very well liked word. And I grew up to understand that the word hospice meant death. Right, and it was like, the jaws of death coming along. And when my mum was first told, with the hospice, people are going to come in and we're going to talk to them. And she was like, I don't want those people in my house. Right, I'm not dying. And so I had to tell everybody, please don't mention that word because my mother will throw you out. And she did on several occasions, sadly. Actually, the first one was the chaplain. She got really cross with him. However, once we started talking and I met with the nurses, one day one of the nurses said to me, you know what, Gail? We're not going to bother to. Here's my card. Just call me when you need me. You can do this job as well as we can. This is what you do.
Right.
And she was right, but I hadn't quite put the two things together. And so I worked with, I loved, and I cared for my mum all through her hospice journey, and she died in my arms. Mm-hmm. And that taught me a huge amount because there I had a patient, a loved one, who could actually talk back to me.
Right.
And whereas with animals, you have a lot of concern. Are they in pain? Should I be doing something? Is this okay? Is this the right thing to do? And you use your intuition a lot.
Right.
And yet you still have this concern that sits with you to be sure that you're caring for them in the very best possible way. But when you've got a human patient who can tell you, oh boy, you learn a lot faster. Sure. And so that was really, really beneficial for me, that journey, because it really helped me to understand the benefits of what I was doing with the animals and how it felt.
Right.
And, two of the biggest things in the end-of-life process for a person are the gradual elimination of hunger. And so the word starvation comes up, and I hear it over and over again. Well, he doesn't want to eat anymore. He's dying, but he's dying of starvation. And now I understand the process, and I can very easily talk about that. Number one, he's not hungry.
Right.
The actual hunger goes away, and starvation isn't actually, it's a big subject, and it's one of the biggest ones that I consult about. And that was really able to help me understand the animal journey and how oxygen is actually the cause of dying, because as oxygen is depleted from the system, as the heart isn't able to circulate the red blood cells that carry the oxygen, dying is a process. Mother Nature invented it.
Right.
And when the time comes for us to die, the Grim Reaper doesn't reach in and grab us by the throat. Mother Nature has an orderly process, and pain, that was one of the biggest things I learned, is that pain isn't a part of death. Death isn't painful. Mm-hmm. Chronic disease is painful, mm-hmm. and that should and can be treated.
Right.
And when it is, that's when dying is beautiful, because it's a very natural process.
Right.
So animals have taught me an awful lot.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was asking. So thank you. So there was another question I wanted to ask you. So if we all have our pets, and we're all very close to our dogs and cats. And if you ever watch Facebook and you see when somebody loses a dog, particularly cats as well, but particularly with dogs, there is always this huge outpouring of sympathy and sadness, and because we all know what that's like. We've all lost a pet that's been dear to us. So if I have a dog who's at that end of life, typically you go to a veterinarian, the veterinarian says, well, we've got to put him down, right? I mean, it's time. You hear that a lot. If you have somebody that's at that point, and you exist, or other people like yourself, how do I make that decision? Do I go the way of putting the dog down, or do I go the holistic route? How does somebody make that decision? Or is that not the right decision?
No, it's not. It's not a holistic route. It's it can be, hospice care can be conventional, holistic. For the most part, hospice care is integrative, because you're doing the best you can for your loved one.
Right.
And in all honesty, that's actually what I'm presenting about at the conference this year, is navigating a terminal diagnosis, because so often people find themselves at the vet hospital and their euthanasia is suggested. There's nothing I can do. I think it's time to let them go. Well, to me, we're not actually letting them go anywhere. I mean, I'd like to use, euthanasia is a very kind word in our society for killing. And let's face it, however much you love or care for any other being, none of us want to kill them. And
Right.
sometimes we do, and we have to, because it is the kindest thing to do. And I completely honor that. And I wouldn't sit in judgment on anybody who decided to euthanize their animal, or their human for that matter, for love.
Right.
Because so long as they're doing it heart and soul for that animal and not for themselves and their suffering, which does sometimes happen, and we've all done it. It's, you hear people say, I just can't bear it. I can't bear it. I know he's suffering. I can't bear it.
Right.
Well, that's about you and not them. And so, I kind of, as very gently suggest that we put that aside and let's talk through where we are and what could be done and see what resonates. But my first advice is, if your loved one is stable, take them home. Take tonight, take maybe 2 or 3 days if you have that time, and just let go.
Right.
Let go of the panic and the fear and, oh my God, he's going to be euthanized, and let's talk about this. What are your cultural, spiritual beliefs? What do you feel about this? Let's talk about grief. If you're already in a hospice journey, once you've had that diagnosis, or you can see an elderly person starting to wind down, that's when you start grieving. When we see our parents in their whatever age it is that we wake up one morning and we look at them and go, oh my God, where did time go? Look, mum's looking really old and she doesn't walk, she doesn't stand up so well. That's when we start actually looking at our relationship and we start grieving. And so when you work through particularly a process of a natural ending to life, you learn to grieve before death. So when death comes, we step into the old-fashioned tradition of a celebration.
Right.
We celebrate the life, we honor the life, because we've already grieved and said goodbye with our loved one, rather than gone through the trauma and then gone into the huge grieving process, which sometimes, particularly with animals, I think for some reason, those of us who regard animals as our family members, we love them with such a passion that it's very different to the love that we have for humans, and it's all completely all-consuming and embracing.
Right.
And when they die, and we haven't had time to be with them, to grieve, to accept, to think about what we believe death is. There are so many different aspects to actual saying goodbye. It's like, somebody steps onto a ship, and they're going forever. They're going off to a foreign land, and you're on the seashore and you're waving, and they're going and they're waving, and then you can't see them anymore, and then you can't see the ship anymore. But they're going over that horizon, and somebody on a far shore, this is a wonderful poem by Henry Van Dyke, someone on the far shore is going, hello, hi, come, hello, and they're welcoming them. Well, that's probably a spiritual way to look at death, and it can be very, very comforting if people have some belief in an afterlife. But when you're in a clinical hospital and someone says it's time, and you say, oh my God, this is terrible, it's awful, but okay, let's do it now. The grief that hits you after that is almost unbearable.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, we had a little Boston Terrier Oreo, and we had to put him down, and we made that decision. And I remember coming home that night, it was like a piece of furniture was gone, or he's just another person. It's just like something's missing in that house, and his spirit still is missing, and it's been 2 years now, I guess, or a year and a half. But yeah, boy, that's thank you so much. So I have to wrap it up because I promised to keep it at 20 minutes, and we're already there. It's hard to believe. We talked a little bit earlier about some books you read, and that you've written, and I'd love for people to know that. And then also, how do they get a hold of you? And of course, if they want to donate money or they want to help your organization, where do they find you?
Well, I guess the easiest way to find us is with our website, which is simply www.brighthaven.org. They can telephone our office, which is area code 707-578-4800. What else can I tell you?
And some of the books that you've donate,
love it.
Yeah, and some of the books you've written. You mentioned you've
yes, actually, you'll find those. They're all on Amazon. There are 5 of them, as I showed you earlier. This is my book that really is all about animal hospice, the whole journey. From the diagnosis, explaining holistic healthcare, goes all the way through to the end of life. And this one's called Saw, My Butterfly, and it's actually all about the dying process for people who have animals who are approaching the end of their lives, to understand the signs and symptoms from about 3 months out, so that they know what's coming, whether they decide to euthanize at the end or whether they don't. It helps them just to know what's normal. And, the breathing's changed a little bit, or he's doing this or he's doing that. Is that normal? I mean, those are the fears that we all face.
Sure.
So I think it's important to help people to, just let go of some of the fear and enjoy the love, because that's what it's all about. Right. It's a loving journey.
Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful, and please give my best to Richard.
I will.
Richard's a great guy, and he's obviously very committed to you and your organization, and thank you both. So thank you so much for spending some time, and I'll see you in the neighborhood.
See you in the morning.
Okay, take care. Thanks again.
Goodbye, Mark.
Bye-bye.